Welcome to Celebrity Death Roulette, the Wheel of Misfortune. This is episode number 11. It's been a while since we've done one of these things, and it's very exciting. So Troy, again, random names, 10 names, came off of the website findadeath.com. I have 2 minutes to respond. Whatever comes out, I have no idea what it's going to be, and here's hoping that I don't bore you. So without further delay, here we go. Number 11. Sam Kinison. So we know Sam Kinison was a former minister. We know that he was a stand-up comic. He left the church and went into stand-up comedy, performing, and he was outrageous. He was funny. He was outrageous. He screamed a lot, which I really liked. His completely unpolitically correct. No way he'd be successful today, or he'd probably be, they'd burn down any comedy club that he performed in, and he became friends with Jessica Hahn, who was the woman who worked for the Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, who Jessica Hahn had the affair with Jim Baker and brought down that whole ministry. And Sam sort of gravitated towards that because I think he became really not enamored with organized religion after that. And I think they did a recording of Wild Thing. And Sam Kinison used to perform at the Comedy Store, which is the former Ciro's on Sunset Strip, the last remaining supper club on the Sunset Strip that's still in its original form, which used to be called It's Boss, and where the Birds were the house band. And Sam was killed in a car accident. He was leaving, he was not in Reno, but he was leaving Nevada. I think he was heading back to LA when he was hit head on by a drunk driver in a pickup truck. And I don't know, somehow his last words were, yeah, I see you, or something like that. He was all by himself. Well, he was with this person who killed him, I think. And he was staggering on the roadside, and he said, yeah, I'll see you, or something to that effect. Like he was having a conversation with somebody. And then he just died on this roadside. And he's buried, Jordan and I were just there not that long ago in Texas, I think. And no, he's a funny guy. And his stand-up album is really one of the best stand-up albums. We liked him. I like Sam Kinison. What do we have? Paul Snider. Well, Paul Snider was they use that term Svengali quite a bit, but he was just a guy with, he used people to get what he wanted from them, or whatever he wanted to accomplish for himself. And he was married to Dorothy Stratton, who was a Playboy model. Wasn't a Playboy model at the time. I think she was just working in a fast food place. I might have her confused with Anna Nicole, but she's from Canada. So was he, and very young. And of course, she was very beautiful. And they got married. And I think he submitted her photographs to Playboy magazine. She was underage, but he lied about her age. And Hefner flew her into Los Angeles and had her pose for Playboy. And he wanted to sign her with Playboy, but Paul Snider, didn't want to be clipped, sort of edged out of that. So he really glommed onto her and wouldn't let her out of his sight. And Hefner was trying to get her out of his grips, and it was just an ugly situation completely, and it sort of set him off, neurotic, possessive, insecure, and eventually he I think that they were still married at the time, and she was having an affair with Peter Bogdanovich when Paul Snider killed her and then killed himself. And he's also responsible, I think, quite responsible for the Chippendales, because he sort of based them off the Playboy bunnies. The Playboy bunnies had the ears and the collars and the cuffs, and he started the whole, the men's version of that, I believe. And that was a whole ugly sort of underworld kind of a thing too, the making of the Chippendales. And Paul Snider was part of that. And Dorothy Stratton, when she was murdered, she was still with Peter Bogdanovich. She's buried at Westwood Memorial Park. She's cremated but buried in a full casket at Westwood Memorial Park. And what a gross guy. He's so gross. Dinosaur. So Dinosaur, I knew her best from the talk show Dinah's Place, and that was through the 70s and the 80s. And she was famous for, I guess there was a jingle, see the USA in your Chevrolet. She was, doing commercials for Chevrolet vehicles, or they were sponsoring her show. I remember that she was supposedly in a relationship for a really long time with Burt Reynolds, which I always found suspect. And Dinosaur, I don't think she died out here in Palm Springs. I know half of her is buried out here in Palm Springs. The other half, she's cremated, and she's at Hillside Memorial Park in Culver City. And I always, people assume that she was a lesbian. I don't think so. But her weekend, they used to have the Dinosaur golf tournament out here. And that became it was like Easter weekend for lesbians out here. It was the Dinah Shore weekend, and then they got rid of the Dinah Shore golf tournament, and now they just have the weekend. The Dinah weekend is what they call it. And but she was supposedly with Burt Reynolds. I'm trying to think of some of the other people that she was romantically involved with. But she was she was very likable. I remember that. She was of the there was Mike Douglas at the time, and Virginia Graham, and not the one I knew, but the Girl Talk. And God, there was one particular episode. Ooh, geez, she had some good episodes, but there was a couple that were really in particular. A couple of moments, but I can't recall what they are right now. A couple of pop culture anyway. So Dinosaur. Oh, I remember when I was a kid, one of the things that that was the funniest thing was somebody said, "That's as funny as Dinosaur shit." And my parents, when I said it, thought it was funny. And I said it over and over and over again until they told me to shut up, because I thought it was so funny. So funny as Dinosaur shit. Andy Gibb of the Bee Gees, of the Gibb brothers. I don't think he was ever part of the Bee Gees, which I thought was curious. Maybe he was really young, too young to be part of the Bee Gees. But he sounded just like them in his own recording. I mean, they had their own career, and then and they were doing it in the 60s, and he did his own thing in the mid 70s, and became really successful on his own. Shadow Dancing, and what was other songs? And I remember that he was involved for a long time with Victoria Principal, and I think they blamed her when he died. I think he died of an overdose, and I think the Bee Gees were blaming Victoria Principal for that, and wouldn't let her show up to his funeral or something crazy like that. Oof. And I know that he and Victoria Principal recorded, I think, Dream. All I want to do is dream. I'm pretty sure they recorded that together. And he is buried at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills, and he is on the same wall as Tamara Detroit, who was one of the people that was in the E.T. costume. Armistead Maupin wrote a book about her called Maybe the Moon. And Shadow Dancing and I Want to Be Your Everything is his other big hit. But he was and he looked like him, and he sounded just like him. And he died very young and left, of course, the legion of fans. I'm trying to think of something else I could tell. I know I think he died in England. I'm pretty sure. I have his death certificate, but he's buried at Hollywood Hills. And for his father used to visit him all the time there. I think every year on the anniversary, the fan club still sends flowers to Andy Gibb's grave. But oh gosh, but I would love to. I forget what that's about. Why they didn't let him in the band. Daryl Winfield. Oh my God. Well, apparently Daryl Winfield was the Marlboro Man, and Marlboro was a cigarette, and Marlboro Reds was probably one of the most successful brands of cigarettes. When I started smoking, I started with Camel Lights, and then I switched to Newport Lights, and then I switched to Marlboro Lights. But for a while I smoked Magnums because I liked this. I liked the way it looked. I liked the cool neon pack that Magnums came in. There was a famous poster in front of the Chateau Marmont on Sunset Boulevard, the Marlboro Man poster. It was a giant, like a 3-story billboard, a cutout billboard, not just like a flat one, but a cutout of the Marlboro Man. And they always showed him in really, macho, cigarette in his mouth poses. And then when cigarette smoking became, they stopped allowing advertisements in magazines and television commercials, because you can still, all those jingles for Get Somebody with Salem and Territon and Parliament and all those cool cigarettes, all those great jingles. And but when they made it illegal to have advertising cigarettes, the Marlboro Man on Sunset was changed, and it was called, instead of saying Marlboro, it said Impotent. And it had the Marlboro Man with a cigarette in his mouth, which he always was. And but it was limp. And that was there for a long time. But I think that was the last time there were any references to cigarette smoking in advertisement. Oh, was that cool? Was it Leave It to Beaver, or one of those shows where they had those billboards where it had a smoker and it would blow smoke rings out of the billboard? That was like the coolest thing. They need to bring smoking back just to make those billboards. I love those billboards. Charles Nelson Reilly. What a queen. What a wonderful, wonderful queen. He, of course, Match Game. That was his big thing. That's why most of us know who he was. I remember him much more from The Ghost of Mrs. Muir, which was one of my favorite shows when I was growing up. I remember when my sister and I used to argue about who, because I think it was on at the same time as My Three Sons. And she wanted to watch My Three Sons, and I wanted to watch The Ghost of Mrs. Muir. But I loved that show with Rita Shaw and Hope Lang. And he played Claymore. And then I think he sort of, Match Game was the next best thing that he did. I'm sure he'd been in a lot of movies, but Match Game, and he and Brett Summers were hilarious. And if you get a chance to Google some of the Match Game moments, there's one where Brett Summers says, well, I live in Beverly Hills. And Charles Nelson just goes off, and because she just lived like on the border of Beverly Hills. And it's a very, very, very funny clip. And in fact, Match Game, God, they just got drunk and did shows. And the drunker they got, the funnier they got. And then he was in Lidsville, the Sid and Marty Krofft show, where he played Hoodoo, who lived in a giant hat. And I really didn't like his makeup in that, but yeah, he and Billy Hayes, Weenie the Genie. And Charles Nelson Reilly was also in, I saw him he was in a show, is it The Nerd? He wrote a show called The Nerd, and I saw him in that in Chicago. And it was a fun show. But if you ever see that one man show of Charles, he was in the audience of that big circus fire on the East Coast. I did a whole video about that. But he was a kid, and then when the tent caught on fire and all those people died, the Hartford Circus Fire. I did that video on Madge Blake, the Madge the Manicurist. He's funny. We need more old queens. Oliver Hardy. God. I know Oliver Hardy was in the first Wizard of Oz. I think he played the Tin Man in the very first silent production of The Wizard of Oz. But of course, everyone knows him as Oliver, as in Laurel and Hardy, Oliver Hardy and Stan Laurel. And very, very funny films that they did, short films. And of course, the most famous being The Music Box, I think. That's the one where they shot in Silver Lake on Vendome Street, where they were, the giant staircase, and they were moving a piano up the stairs, and they kept falling down, and they kept going up and falling down again. And I know that Stan Laurel, he lived in Santa Monica for many years. Oliver Hardy, at the end of his life, he lived in North Hollywood, on, I think it was Auckland Street, when he died. And his nickname was Babe. I don't know if all of his friends called him Babe, but I know Stan Laurel affectionately referred to him as Babe. And he is cremated, and he's his ashes are inurned or buried at Valhalla Cemetery, or Valhalla Memorial Park, where we did all these, those ceremonies for Mishu and Ken Weatherwax, and we placed stones for Johnny Arthur and Thelma Pellish, and I'm trying to think. They did a This Is Your Life with Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, and it was shocking to see them old. I mean, they sort of stopped aging when they're, in their, they were probably like 50 when they were doing the movies, but back then, it just, it just seemed a lot younger, but it was actually probably a lot older. But they did it This Is Your Life, which is pretty wild to see them sort of moving and walking and talking, and not in their normal Laurel and Hardy outfits. But they Sons of the Desert, I think. Tiny Tim. I love Tiny Tim. With the recent passing of Ruth Buzzy, we are reminded of the groundbreaking television program Laugh-In the 60s, the early 60s, or I'd say mid to late 60s. Everyone thinks like they were like 69, but they were almost over in 69. They were active, like the Smothers Brothers were early on. His name was Herbert Corey. And I'm not quite sure why he started doing what he was doing, but he played the ukulele and he looked bizarre and he would sing in falsetto, and he was a hit in Greenwich Village during that whole time of, Joan Rivers and Phyllis Diller. And it was just a spectacle, and he would carry his ukulele in a paper bag and bring it out and he'd sing. And then I think it was Dan Rowan had seen him and brought him on the show as a surprise for Dick Martin. And if you get a chance to see that on Laugh-In, it's hilarious because Dick Martin is not expecting it, and Tiny Tim comes out and he sings Tiptoe Through the Tulips, which was also used in a horror movie, which is absolutely perfect. And then he would blow kisses and he would do this weird falsetto thing. And Tiny Tim himself was really neurotic. He would his wife, Miss Sue, his last wife, I interviewed her. She was telling me he would drink salsa from the jar, and he wouldn't use towels. So when he took a shower, he would only use paper towels, and he would slather like lotion on himself, like Vaseline Intensive Care, but it was like the blue one for the upper body, and like, I don't know, there's a different one for the lower body. And he was performing, he was doing like, he was making so much money, and he's cutting albums. And at the end of his life, it was like humiliating. He was doing like circuses and people were mocking him, but he was like, hey, as long as they're seeing me, that's all I ever wanted, was to be recognized, to be seen, to be a performer. And at the end of his life, he was performing at a women's club in Minneapolis, I think it was. And the band leader was to introduce Tiny Tim, and he hated Tiny Tim, and he wasn't nice to Tiny Tim. It's on Findadeath. Princess Margaret. Yeah, there are so many stories about Princess Margaret. I mean, she's the younger sister of Queen Elizabeth, and most people would agree that she was to be she's the one who wanted to be the queen, and Elizabeth was sort of thrust into being the queen because she was the oldest of the two when their father died suddenly. And she was a part of the swinging 60s, and she wanted to be married to Tony, was it Snowden? Oh my God. And he was divorced, and they wouldn't let her marry him, and it was really shitty. And she hung out with Peter Sellers and the Beatles, and she was, sort of hanging out in London during the swinging 60s because it was sort of rebellious because they wouldn't let her marry the guy that she wanted to marry. And then she just turned into a dick, and she just was so nasty to people. People I used to work with told me that she would just, not even look at them when she go into an event. She would just not even look at people and just take her jacket, her coat, and just toss it off, and not toss it off, and not even look. And she would just hold out her glass, and people would have to run in and fill it with, I think was it wild grouse, or was that the name of the what she drank? But she was a piece of work, but probably the best best fun of the royals, but she was so resentful. You know, there was always a thing about you go to parties and no one, you know, if she was going to a party, no one could leave before she left. So she would sit there and like smoke cigarettes for like hours, and people could even get up to use the bathroom because she had to leave first. It was just royal protocol, and she just used it, and she was so nasty. And when Diana died, you know, it was crazy, insane all over London. And when she died, it was like there was nothing. In front of Kensington Palace for Diana, there were like hundreds of yards of flowers. When Princess Margaret died, there were like a little section like this because she was just nasty, but funny, a very funny lady. She took after her father. She had a bite. Eve Arden. It's funny, I am Facebook friends with, and if you saw my crater face, Dennis, I can't remember his last name right off the top of my head, from Greece. I interviewed Eddie Deason, who was Eugene in Greece, and Dennis Stewart. And Eddie just recently posted that he was in the movie 1941, which I knew. I didn't know that Eve Arden was in 1941 as well. And he said that out of all the people in Greece that he was close to, or he enjoyed spending time with, it was Eve Arden that was the closest he was closest to, because they got along really, really well. And I always said that she was like the American Maggie Smith. You know, she had that sort of stink face down really, really well. She was good friends with Lucille Ball. I think when they did Desilu, I think Desilu produced her show, which, because right now I'm on the spot and I can't remember the name of her show, Armis Brooks. And she was in that, of course, in that Joan Crawford movie where she was, what was it, where she was the waitress. And she just did really, it's just bite, you know, like Maggie Smith did, just like sort of looking down your nose, that sort of biting, sarcastic sense of humor. She was married to Brooks West, and I remember when she died, because I went to the cemetery and saw that it was fresh. Actually, she had just been cremated and just been buried there. I took some pictures of that too, and you could just tell she'd been put there. But it says her gravestone says, her tablet says Eve Arden West. And she lived, oh gosh, I can't remember, St. Ives Street, I think, and it was just down the street from Spencer Tracy's home, I believe, and I believe that's where she died. I went and traced that down in the it's on findadeath.com. And my friend Roger went to her funeral at Westwood, and they were giving out, I think it was, oh, that's it, that's the game over. Well, that wasn't too bad. I think I filled the time pretty well. Marlboro Man was tough, but I think I coped. So, right, number 11 is done. But that was fun, right? So, thank you for joining me for this. And I'll just say this because I have a second. I have a Patreon page down below if you wish to subscribe. It is a supporters page. A couple of bucks a month will provide you'll get, if you join up, exclusive content, a monthly question and answer thing that's exclusive. And I communicate with everybody there too, one-on-one, and it helps a great deal. So if you go to patreon.com and search for Scott Michaels, or it's actually in the link below in the video, it's very much appreciated, because in these difficult times, it's very important and very much appreciated, as is your time, as is your attention. And until next time.
You heard me.